Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Nesson Podcast. Today we're going to discuss the 2017 Kentucky Derby. I'm Ricky Doyle. I don't know a whole lot about horse racing, but it's all right because I brought in a couple of guys who do know a little something that can enlighten us a little bit today. First, I'm joined by Nesson's own Colin Sheehan. And joining us on the line is a editor for turfandsport.com, also the resident horse expert for oddshark.com, Mike Dempsey. Mike, thanks for joining us, and Colin, thank you as well for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Nice to be with you guys.
All right, there's a lot to get into with this, the 143rd running of the Kentucky Derby, but I'd like to start off, we'll start a little broadly and then we'll kind of narrow it down into this particular race. But the post positions, they were drawn on Wednesday. There was a lot of buzz surrounding that. So I'll start with you, Mike. I want to know, as somebody who doesn't know a lot about horse racing, why is the pre-race, the drawing of the post, why is that such an important process going into the race? I mean, what kind of conclusions can you draw from something like that, figuring out where horses are starting from?
Well, you got a 20-horse field, so in some years traffic can be a problem going into that first turn. You don't want to draw the rail, the 1 or 2 posts. You don't really want to draw the 19 or 20 posts. Really, 6 out of the 9 last winners have been somewhere between 13 and 18, right in that range. So that's really where you want to be. For instance, Always Dreaming, who's going to be one of the favorites for the race, drew the 5 post, which means he's going to be a little bit towards the inside, which means his jockeys may have to use him a little bit earlier than he would like to make sure that he doesn't lose position going into the first turn. Because you got to remember, all these horses on the outside are going to try to move in, try to save a little ground going into that first turn. So that's the main reason the post position draw is so important. You don't want to be stuck way outside and lose ground going in that first turn, and you don't want to be down on the inside and get buried and get behind a bunch of horses going into that first turn.
I know it's always such a big story who gets that inside post in the 1. I've never been so intrigued as I have been this year, where the 20-horse Patch doesn't have a left eye, so he's not going to know necessarily who's to his inside. And looking at Lee, who is in the 1 post, what do you think, Michael, as far as a horse that probably wants to stay behind and isn't going to mind the traffic going in front of him? I actually like looking at Lee to maybe get into the exotics with that closing style that he runs. What do you think?
Yeah, drawing the rail, he's such a deep closer. I don't think the rail draw is really going to hurt him because there's some speed to his outside, so he should be able to be taken back for a good late run. So it's not really a problem. Patch on the far outside is one of 3 top Pletcher horses. Of course, Pletcher has a well-documented 1-for-45 record in the Kentucky Derby. Patch is a little bit lightly raced. There have been some other good horses that have run with just 1 eye, so it's not really a big deal. It hasn't been a problem in his previous races. I don't really consider that into the handicapping equation. But out of Pletcher's 3 horses, I'm not a really big fan of Patch. I just don't think he's got enough experience to go 1.25 miles on the first Saturday in May.
The good bet in recent years seems to be the favorites. I mean, 4 years in a row, the favorite going into the race has come away victorious. This year, that distinction belongs to Classic Empire. I know that Empire kind of battled some, injuries, leading up to this race. I know he bounced back in his last one, but do you have any concerns about him at all going into this race?
Well, generally over the years, any horse along the Derby trail in the spring that has hiccups, I generally throw out. And this guy's had plenty of them. Last year in the Hopeful, he wheeled, dropped his jockey. This year he's had some issues. But he came back so well in the Arkansas Derby that I really think he's a legitimate horse to win the race.
I remember talking with you last year, Michael. You really liked Nyquist, who won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Is looking for Classic Empire, who won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Maybe, so you're saying we're not going to have back-to-back sweeps of those 2 races?
I don't think so. I mean, there's a couple other horses. As a horse player, what I'm looking for too is value in the race. And when you look at Classic Empire, who's going to go off at either 4-1, I think he might drift up to maybe 9-2. In a 20-horse field, there's another 6 or 8 horses in the race that have a legitimate shot to win, and I'd rather pick one of those at 10 or 12-1 than stick with a 4-1 shot. But it has been frustrating over the past 4 years with these favorites, because generally over the years, this is one of the best betting races of the year. And last year, not only did the favorite win, but the top 4 betting choices ran 1, 2, 3, 4. But we're not going to see that again. We may not see that again for a number of years.
It seems to me like this is a pretty wide open year with not only the pace that may set up, but the amount, as you said, with Classic Empire's hiccups and the amount of contention that he may have. Who do you think is maybe the favorite to win outside of Classic Empire in that 10-1 odds?
Well, Always Dreaming is the second choice. I tell you what, he's got one really good race in the Florida Derby. I'm not real keen on him or Pletcher with his well-documented record. The horse I really kind of like is McCracken, who also has had some issues along the way. He came out of the Sam F. Davis, a little ankle issue, and he missed his next intended start, which was going to be in the Tampa Bay Derby. Ian Wilkes passed on that race, waited for the Bluegrass, and he only ran third in that race. But I think that race sets up well for him. Ian Wilkes is a trainer that used to be an assistant trainer for Carl Navsker, who won 2 Kentucky Derbies, one with Unbridled, the second with Street Sense. So Ian Wilkes has been around good horses. And in fact, both of those horses ran in the Bluegrass and lost in the Bluegrass. One ran second, one ran third. So it's, he's got a lot of the same traits that his mentor had, and I think he's coming in the race really well. He's kind of the buzz horse around the backstretch. He's been working really well the past week or so at Churchill Downs. He looks like $1 million right now. So he's 5. I thought he was going to be about 8-1 on the morning line. He's 5-1 on the morning line. I think he's going to go off between 5-1 and 6-1. But I really do like his chances, and I like Irish Warcry as well. I think he's got a pretty good shot as well for Grand Motion.
So you answered my question that I wrote down here is, why does everyone love McCracken? I haven't been able to sell myself on him. A horse that lost to 31-1 IRAP. Do you think IRAP has any chance in this race?
I don't, and I've gone back and forth on that because I think the Bluegrass was a prep for McCracken, and he wasn't cranked 100% for that race. He's going to move forward off that race. IRAP was a maiden going into the race, but he ran some pretty good races going in. But let's not forget, McCracken raced 3 times over the Churchill Downs main track last year, and he won all 3, including the Kentucky Jockey Club, which is a pretty prestigious Grade 2 race. So he's got experience over the main track, and I think that's important as well. And also, if the rains come, this guy's bred to handle a wet track. So I kind of like that as well.
If it's raining on Saturday, as it looks like it will be, then maybe I'll jump on McCracken. I'm a huge fan of Irish Warcry as well. I grew up a fan of Curlin. I like the white dot on the forehead of Irish Warcry, and I've loved the stretch runs that he's shown where he doesn't look like he's flying, but he just keeps coming, just like Curlin's style used to be, where he keeps digging in and digging in. Irish Warcry is where I've fallen, and it's hard for me to get off. Am I okay going that route?
Yeah, he's my second choice. I have a soft spot for trainer Grand Motion. When I lived in Maryland, I raced some horses. I had a owner's box right next to Grand Motion. This was 20 years ago, before anyone really knew who he was. I picked Animal Kingdom, and he rewarded us really nicely with a $43 horse. I think Grand Motion is one of the top trainers in the country. Irish Warcry also is really the only horse in this field with 2 Beyer speed figures over 100. The problem is, in between those races, he ran a real stinker in the Fountain of Youth, where he was beaten over 20 lengths. So Motion has no excuse for that race. He couldn't figure out why the horse ran so poorly. He bounced back really nicely in the Wood Memorial. So I'm kind of leaning towards, if Grand Motion thinks he's ready, and he's run 2 very impressive races, I think he's going to run another one come Derby Day. And he's another one that's bred pretty well for to handle an off track.
There's a little bit of a soft spot story there with Rajiv getting the handle as jockey. I kind of like that change for the style that he runs as well. Would you agree?
I do. Marat, he missed a lot of time. He's had a couple really major injuries. He's a friend of Grand Motion. They're pretty close. He was out almost a year. It didn't look like he was going to make it back. He had I think he broke 4 vertebrae. He was out like 9 months. He came back. He struggled a little bit when he first came back, and then instead of going to Gulfstream Park, he stayed in New York, got things going, and he's riding really well in New York right now. So I have no qualms with Marat being in the irons on Saturday.
So another important aspect to this race that we can teach Ricky about is the pace.
Please do.
He's been awfully quiet through
We
this
need
whole
to teach him
thing.
about pace and what the pace might be in the Kentucky Derby. What do you think, how it's going to set up? Do you foresee a stalker or a closer finally breaking the stretch of 4 up-front horses that have won the last 4?
I don't think a horse is going to go gate to wire. The connections of Fast and Accurate are saying that they're sending them. And there's a couple other horses toward the inside that have a little speed. I think the pace is going to be fast, but it's not going to be crazy fast. Some of these races we've seen over the years past, there was usually one or two sprinters that got into the race by winning sprint races and earning graded earnings. Now with the point system, they're almost entirely route races. So those speed horses that have really no chance aren't making it into the Derby field. So I think that's one of the reasons we've seen the favorites win the past 4 years too, because the race runs more true to form than it did when we had some crazy early pace battles. So I think the speed will be honest. I think a horse breaking mid-pack towards the back are going to win the race. I think you might have one or two plotters that flop home for the third and fourth spot. We see that almost every year. But I think this race is going to be won by the jockeys that get a good trip, that are sitting sixth or seventh, right in that area, and then jump on the closers, get a good jump on the closers before they close on the going into the final furlong.
Now, I'm sitting here, and I'm trying to soak up all this information as a newcomer, and I've heard you break down specific horses and specific reasons to pick those particular horses. You mentioned, Mike, value being one thing that you look at heavily going into this race, and really any race. So I guess my question is is a bigger picture thing, is when you first look at the field as, who's going to be in the race, the Kentucky Derby, what exactly are you looking for? What are the most important factors when it comes to making assessments on each particular horse? Because like I've said, I've heard all these various reasons as to, why a certain horse might do well in this race and why somebody might struggle a little bit. So I was just wondering if there are any important factors that you could tell me as somebody who, admittedly doesn't really know a lick about this stuff, that you look at going into this.
Well, for my Derby horse, number one, I want to have a horse that has a foundation as a 2-year-old. I like to see a horse that's had 2 or 3 starts as a 2-year-old, hopefully a race in a stakes race, and either a win or a good showing. So he's got a good foundation as a 2-year-old. Because you got to remember, these young 3-year-olds are going 1.25 miles for the first time in their careers. As a 3-year-old, I don't necessarily care if they win, although I think the last 6 Derby winners have won their final prep race. But you want a sharp race. Like I think McCracken, who ran 3rd, wasn't a great race, but I think that sets him up to run a good race. And I think you want to have good connections. You want to have a trainer that's been down the road before, and you want to have a jockey that's been down the road before as well. But most importantly is these horses are improving rapidly. I don't think you want a horse that's ran humongous in their last prep, because a lot of times they regress off that race, or what we call bounce. I think you want to see a horse that's moving in the right direction. And I think a horse like McCracken is doing that, and I think a horse like Irish War Cry, despite that dull effort, those other 2 races were rock solid. So I think you're looking for horses, that are heading in the right direction. That's what I look for.
Now, what about weather? Because you touched on it, but I was curious as to, how much you look at the forecast going into this, and whether there's been times where you wake up the morning of the race, weather's not exactly what you're expecting, and all of a sudden your analysis changes a little bit. I mean, how much stock do you put into the conditions of the track?
Well, I've been fretting a lot because number one, I hate weathermen, and I track weather in Florida, Kentucky, New York, day in and day out. And let me tell you something: if these guys had to wager on their forecast like I do, they would all be living in a cardboard box. I swear. They're horrible. Right now, the way the forecast is, there's rain falling in Louisville today. There's about a 60% chance of rain on Friday. There's an 80% chance of rain on Saturday. Now that number on Saturday has changed about 5 times over the past 6 hours. It's gone from 60 to 90 to 70 to 80. The way I'm handicapping the race is, I think on Friday for Oaks Day, I think there's a pretty good potential for having an off track, either a sloppy or muddy track, and I think the turf course is going to be good to yielding. On Saturday, there's occasional rain showers. Now, the Churchill Downs main track has a really good drainage system, and also there's a lot of time in between the races. So if there is going to be a downpour, say at 2 o'clock, after the race is run, they can seal the track, and then a lot of the moisture and rain will run off the track, and then they get it back up and going again. And there's about an hour between the Kentucky Derby and the race previous to that, so they have time to work on the track. And with just occasional showers, I think there's a pretty good chance by post time for the Derby, which is 6:45, that we're going to have a fast track, or we're going to have a good track, a track with a little bit of moisture. I don't think it's going to be a quagmire. like I said, there's an 80% chance of rain. It could happen, but I'm leaning towards there being more of a good to fast track on Saturday afternoon.
Being in New England and going to Suffolk Downs, I don't look at the weather until I'm actually there and minutes before the race to actually see.
Exactly.
Maybe that's why I'm not as good as you, but
exactly.
I'll take the conditions as they come up and then adjust accordingly. I know Hens, I believe, has run a sloppy track and had some success. So he's one that's on my outer peripheral, and if it ends up being that way, maybe he's someone that I look to throw in. I had a question last year. We had Trojan Nation as the maiden, which was always surprising to me to see a horse that hasn't won to be in the Kentucky Derby. This year we have Sonneteer, and I don't know if you remember last year I was big on Exaggerator. I love the closing style. It's something that I'm always kind of attracted to. It seems like in his last race, although he didn't win, he had a really good stretch run. It was closing on a lot of horses. I like to see when they're gaining ground, especially when the Kentucky Derby is longer. Is this a year when a maiden gets the first win at the Kentucky Derby at a nice price too?
I mean, we saw IRAP win the Bluegrass. I mean, Sonneteer, he's getting a little buzz around the backstretch. I've heard some people talking about him. I think a lot of players are going to use him in the trifectas and superfectas. I mean, he's 50 to 1 the morning line. He's going to go off at 45 or 50 to 1. So I dug into his pedigree a little bit because he's a really a late runner. So I thought he might have a long-winded pedigree, and he really doesn't. He's by Midnight Luton, who was a really good sprinter, and he's out of a mare by Half Hours, who's I believe was also a sprinter. So there's not a ton of stamina pedigree in there. Although he is a late runner. I mean, the Arkansas Derby and the Rebel, he ran really well in both of those. But, I mean, it's such a wide-open race. I mean, I might end up using him lightly in some of my, superfecta bets. But chances are I'm just not going to get to him. There's just too many other horses that have run faster and just seem to have more talent than this horse.
I agree. One of the long shot closes I'm looking at is looking at Lee in that inside post. I've looked at his past performances, and you see at the end, willingly drove past, drew away, improved. And I watched the Arkansas Derby where coming down the stretch, he was left, right. If he just went straight, I would have liked to have seen what he could do against Classic Empire. And he's someone that I'm putting underneath. Do you have him as well?
I don't have him, but you mentioned Hens earlier, and I do like him. And he's kind of a late running horse. He ran a really good Beyer speed figure in that Sunland Derby, and of course, not too many Derby winners come out of New Mexico, but Mind That Bird ran pretty well. He won at 50 to 1, and Firing Line came out of that race in 2015 and ran second in the Kentucky Derby. And some of the horses he beat have come back and run really well. Conquest Mo Money, the runner-up, came back to run well. So I think that race is starting to look pretty good. 3 horses have come out of that race to run good numbers next time out. So he's actually my third choice in the race. And I think he's the perfect type of horse that can come running towards the end and pick up a piece. I'm not sure he's good enough to win, but if he's 20 to 1 or 22 to 1, he might be worth a small stab.
So while we're on the closers, we haven't talked about Vera. What are your opinion on that closer style?
That's probably the horse that's making me nervous because I'm not using them. I'm just not convinced that Florida Derby effort wasn't all that great, and I don't really like Always Dreaming that much. So I just couldn't get to Vera. And I think he's 15 to 1 in the morning line. I think he's going to get a little bit of play. He's going to go off more like 10 to 1 or 12 to 1. But I just ended up not getting to him. I just liked Hens, and I liked Practical Joke a little bit better, as well as J Boy's Echo as my 3 kind of outside horses that have a good shot of landing in the Tri or Super.
The distance doesn't scare you on Practical Joke?
It really doesn't, and I think the reason why, I really respect Chad Brown as a trainer. I just think he's one of the best trainers. And, I kind of liked his Bluegrass. He didn't get the IRAP in the stretch, and I actually picked him in the Bluegrass. So I was a little frustrated because coming in the stretch, it looked like for sure he was going to pass IRAP. I just thought for sure, my tickets were going to be winning ones, and he just never got by him. But I think he's moving forward a little teeny bit each race. He still hasn't run fast enough to crack the exacta in the Derby, but I think he is heading in the right direction. And I think another move forward kind of puts him pretty close. I wasn't thrilled with the 19 post, though, however. So hopefully, we're going to see 25 or 30 to 1. Then he's going to start looking a little bit better to me.
All right. I feel a little bit better about my potential picks going on this weekend. I'm still a guy that's probably going to take you know, a long shot who's gonna fall right out of the gate, or you know, somebody based off their name without any information. But I have an abundance of information off which to go this weekend that I didn't have coming into this podcast. Is there any other tips, advice, predictions, even just anything that you know, myself and everybody else who's tuning in, you know, as somebody who's not an expert, should look forward to as we go into this weekend? Something to sign us off on.
Well, you got to Kentucky Oaks. There's 13 races. Kentucky Derby Day, there's 14 races. So there's 27 races to wager on between the 2 days at Churchill Downs. So don't throw all your money into the Derby. There's a bunch of good stake races. Both, I think there's 5 stake races or 6 stake races on Friday, 7 on Saturday. The Kentucky Oaks is a wide open field, a field of 14. So that's a great day. So, you know, my suggestion would be call in sick on Friday and stay home and wager, or head out to the OTB or your local track, because there's a lot of great action both Friday and Saturday.
I'm off tomorrow, so I'm all set.
That's a good enough reason for me. I'm gonna send out that email once I get back to my desk.
So who's the money down for the winner, Michael?
I'm going to stick with McCracken. I'm hoping to see 5 to 1 or 6 to 1. I'm not crazy. I'd be more enthusiastic at 7 or 8 to 1. But I'm going to go with him, and like I said, Irish War Cry, I think, has got a really good chance. That's who I'm rooting for, too, because I really do respect Grand Motion. So those are my top 2 picks going into Saturday.
Nice. You got a pick, Colin?
Irish War Cry, it's hard for me to get off my love attachment to Curlin, who's had success with some horses, although not in the Derby, and Keen Ice, I believe, was a horse by Curlin who had some success in the Triple Crown series. With a name like Colin Sheehan, Irish War Cry is difficult to get off of as well. And I'm going to put him over Looking at Lee, Vera, and Classic Empire. And come Saturday, I'll probably be putting him over all the long shots and hopefully getting a nice payday.
It's the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to save mine until right around post time and then finally make a judgment. But guys, I appreciate you coming on. I got Nesson's Colin Sheehan, Mike Dempsey of turfandsport.com, also the horse expert over at Oddchalk. Guys, appreciate you taking the time.
All right, good luck on Saturday.
Enjoy the races.